There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here with a very special guest, Daniel from Israel, who has recently begun his BookTube channel under the name Guilty Feet. Welcome to my channel, Daniel.
Thank you very much for having me, Shawn. It is just an honor and a privilege. You're a superstar and a hero, and I feel very blessed to be here. Thank you.
Well, I thank you. Your check is in the mail.
And I was told very susceptible to flattery. That was the notes that I got.
Susceptible to many things, including flattery. And we have had a mysterious history with each other. I followed you. We followed each other on Litsy. But I didn't put that together with your Goodreads login, and I certainly didn't know about your channel until you did your first tag. So what's your version of that story?
Bookish people are looking for bookish outlets. And so that I'm part of a number of Facebook groups. And when I don't really use Instagram very much, so I never sort of bookstagrammed anything. But then when Litsy started, I thought, oh, that sounds fun. And for a while, I sort of stopped using it over the last 18 months or so, or just not stopped using it. I haven't gone back to it. But for a while, as part of every time I finished a book, I write a little review on Goodreads, and then I would cut and paste it to Litsy and take a little picture of the thing, and got involved in that community. I think I'm there because I log in with Facebook. So there I'm under my real name, not Guilty Feet, which is maybe why it was harder. And yeah, you were there, one of the kind of people that I would follow, because I'm always looking for people who have eclectic reading tastes, who read broadly and primarily literary fiction, rather than people who read broadly amongst just fantasy or just something else. And then we crossed paths there. And then I think from there, I must have got to you on Goodreads. I'm guessing it went that direction, but maybe not, because also on Goodreads, I look for people.
And I don't talk about Litsy very much because, like you, I've kind of just gotten away from it. But on the few occasions that I do, I get a comment, what is Litsy? So how would you answer that question, Daniel?
Well, I think it set itself up as an Instagram for books. Now, I know that in this community, Instagram for books is on Instagram. That's the great thing about Instagram, that they've managed to, like YouTube, develop sub-communities within it. So Litsy is kind of redundant. It's got a slightly different interface and slightly different way of, it's much easier to find books, and you can search for books and file under a book so that people can find you that way, and find your reviews and your comments and your pictures that way. So I think it's a nice interface. I think it's struggling against the giant behemoth that is Bookstagram, but you know, it's a nice community. I know I have someone actually who lives close to me in Israel, who I met through Litsy, and she is a Litsy maniac. She has made friends from all over the world, and she's there all the time, and she lives in Litsy the way that other people live on BookTube. Through her, I hear what's going on, and she's always trying to get me more involved. But she's absolutely terrific.
We'll edit this out if it's confidential, but I think she's a friend of mine.
In Litsy, she is Sin F Hen.
Yeah,
Cindy. Cindy, yeah, I often bump into her. She's been up here. She's one of the few people who's actually been in this room and seen the library, because she was passing by one morning. I said, you've got to come in and see it. She said, I heard all about it. Yeah, she's great.
How do you pronounce her Litsy name? I've never known how to pronounce it.
Oh, I don't know. Her real name is Cindy, C-I-N-D-Y.
Yeah, she told me that I was her first Litsy crush.
Oh.
So
it makes sense. I can understand
in her house, but I've been in her heart.
You know, I'm not going to compete with you, Shawn. Clearly, there is some kind of attraction going on there that I don't want to get in the middle
of. Does she know that you and I have connected?
I don't know. I don't know. I have to bump into. I think my wife's on the weekend.
I
will do. I will do, and I'll send her this link when it comes out, and she'll be thrilled. I haven't told anyone that I'm doing YouTube. Like, nobody that I know in real life knows that I'm doing this. So I guess at some point when I cross 1 million subscribers, I may put the word out.
So she doesn't know that you're on BookTube.
No.
Oh, I see. Now, do you talk about the fact that your immediate family doesn't know? Do you talk about that on your channel?
I mentioned it in it. I mean, look, it's not a big deal. I just don't need them ragging on me about things all the time. But yeah, I'm not embarrassed by what I'm doing, but I kind of was at the beginning, and it was about wanting to get some headway get some momentum. And actually doing it once and putting up one video was never anything, and doing it for a week or 2 weeks, the struggle for me was always saying, well, am I going to do something on a regular basis? And I wanted to get ahead of steam up before I started telling people, oh, I did that, but I'm not doing it anymore.
That's probably very wise, but you certainly have quite a body of work on your booktube channel now.
It goes quickly.
Yeah, you've got what, a couple dozen videos?
About 20, 22, 23 so far.
Yeah. And how long have you been online?
Since just before the new year. So I think sort of 23rd, 24th of December, I was sitting around, I was waiting. I was supposed to fly to London to see my mum on the 24th of December. And then, we thought things got better, but then things didn't get better. So that got cancelled. So I was waiting to go to London because I had a load of books waiting for me there. So I thought I'd start with this big haul. That would be a great opening. Anyway, that got cancelled. I said, you know what? Either I'm going to do it or I'm not going to do it. So I did it.
That's awesome. So you have an amazing intro, and you have already given me permission. So I'm going to put the intro in right now. Here it is. And tell me about this intro and how you came up with this.
Well, it was my dream. I don't want to presume anyone else's, but I always wanted to have a ladder on wheels. So we did a renovation in the apartment summer 2019. And one of the things that we said we want to do was I'd had some IKEA Billy bookshelves that the books were being stored on and were double stacked and overflowing. And I said, if we're going to do it, let's do it. And we'll make the whole length. We've got this very long, it's an apartment, but this is the whole living room wall, all the way from the big windows down to the end of the. And I said, let's cover the whole wall and do it. We'll leave a little nook for a sofa. And my wife, thank goodness, thought it was a great idea. She's wasn't always, well, she didn't like the Billy bookshelves. She didn't hated the double stacking, hated the messiness of it, and the fact that we got these nice white shelves. So for me, I'm always about the practical over the aesthetic. I want things, the shelves had to be the right height so I could fit books in them. And the only thing that's really not very practical and is purely aesthetic is the ladder, because you could stand on a chair. I don't need the ladder to climb up and get to the top shelves, but it was just a fun thing. I said, let's do it. And the guy who was doing the renovation said he could do it. And so we did it. And then I got my daughter to hold the camera without really explaining what I wanted her to do, and made her film me shooting across the screen.
Yeah, I'm so envious of the ladder and the all of that paraphernalia. I'm just oozing envy. But there was something about the comedic aesthetic of the intro that it tickles my funny bone on such a deep level. And I've talked to somebody who, when they heard me rave about the intro, and I put a link or something, and they said, I don't get it. Why do you love this so much? It's so funny. Like, he's trying to be really cool and debonair, and just gracefully gliding, but he runs out of steam, and in this kind of self-deprecatingly awkward, bumpy way, pushes himself along, and that is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I just love it so much.
First of all, I'm delighted that appeals to you, because it totally appealed to me, and that wasn't planned. I flung myself across, got as far as I could, realized I was still in shot, and knew it was going to be sort of pathetic end to this glorious, and we didn't shoot it like 10 times and check it and try it again. We did it and put it up, and I got a kick out of it because of that, so I'm pleased you did. But I have to say, I think there are other things where you and I have similar sensibility that not everyone else gets, and there was a part, we could talk about the tag that I did, which a few people did, and I called it the effed up books tag. Yes. And one of the prompts was sexy AF up, right? Because I kept hitting this word effed up, which I deliberately wrote as EFFTUP, because first of all, I think effed up. Am I allowed to swear on your channel?
For fuck's sake.
So effed up is funnier than fucked up. And when there was one person who did it who thought that I was calling it effed up because I was afraid of the word fuck, or I was too prudish to say fuck, or, and that wasn't it. I just think effed up was cuter. And also EFFTUP was a neologism which would be easier to search for if I called it the EFFD, So anyway, in the effed up take, I had that sexy AF'd up, and nobody got it. Nobody understood that it was sexy AF. effed up, right? And you were the only one who got it and said, oh yeah, that's good. And everyone else was going, oh, he must have written this wrong. Sexy A, what does that mean? He means sexy as, or... So you and I have something where we're more in sync than maybe other people.
So I was not too sexy for your tag. That is awesome. It was a great tag, everybody. I'll put a link in the show notes to Daniel's original tag, my version. And if you haven't done it, Daniel and I are jointly tagging you because we need to keep that one going.
100%.
I usually like to begin these chats. Recently, I've kind of gotten into the habit of beginning these kind of bookish chats by doing a little show and tell. What's one of the more recent books that you've brought into the house? Purchasing, borrowing, whatever.
So just this week, I went out into a physical bookshop. There's a charity English language bookshop in my town, and I went out and bought something. I don't know if this is a Shawn book, but this is one of the ones that had a lot of love, and I picked up, and it's Less by Andrew Sean Greer. Have you read Less?
I have not read Less and decided maybe I wasn't going to try it, but a lot of my gay bookish friends have been chastising me that I really should, so I might.
Well, I was put off it because I'm just not a great fan of books when they call them, it's a comic novel. That immediately sets off alarm bells for me. But I've heard great things about it, but it's one of these things where I was in a secondhand store and I wanted to buy something. This was more a something buy, which I'm optimistic that I'm going to have a good time. It won the Pulitzer Prize, for goodness sake. I'm optimistic I'm going to have a good time with it, but it wasn't a book that I discovered sitting there and said, oh, that sounds, I've heard about this book. I've seen people talk about it. I'm just short on books at the moment because I haven't, there's nothing coming in. I'm hoping still to get to London in 2 weeks' time where I have 100+ books waiting for me. But in the meantime, might be reading less. So that's it.
Well, I hope
I'll let you know whether I think it's good for you after I'm done.
Yeah, I wasn't drawn to the plot line of it and the comedy, that it was a comic novel. It doesn't usually grab me, but also a lot of people whose reading tastes I respect absolutely loved it. Now, some of his earlier work sounded more interesting to me than this one. But the one that I have, and I don't know, you have to tell me, I'm not picking it because I think it's a Daniel book. I will be much more apprised of what is and isn't a Daniel book by the end of this chat. But this is a book that was recommended to me on a recent Zoom chat video that I put up with the Irish novelists Ronan Hession and Covery Madavan, where they recommended Irish lit. And one of the ones that Covery recommended was this, and I bought it immediately. And it is A Quiet Tide by Marianne Lee. It is her debut novel set in Ireland, and it's a historical novel about an Irish woman who was a pioneering botanist in Ireland. She died in 1815, aged 29, and didn't get credit in history for a lot of her discoveries. The men in her life took credit for all those. And this is a historical novel based on her true life story. And she is so famous where in Ireland is she from? Bantry Bay is the name of the bay. And that, I think it's Bantry Bay. They still have what is this? I should give this woman the name here. Her name is Ellen Hutchins in real life and in the novel. And she was Ireland's first female botanist and discovered a lot of important stuff about botany. And that town or that area, Bantry Bay, they have a Ellen Hutchins festival every year. So wow, know even more about her once I read the book.
Just tell you, I need to see how thick it is. I was going to say, turn it on its side. Let's have a look at it. What's that? 450, 500 pages. It's not a slim book, right?
Yeah, it's just under 400 pages. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not familiar with it. It sounds great. My roots, I don't know if I've said this or I think I've mentioned it once or twice. My parents are both from Ireland. So although I'm born in London and moved to Israel, my parents were born and educated in Dublin and moved to London when they got married. I don't have an Irish passport yet, although I'm entitled to one. I may, now that Britain is dropped out of the EU, it may be worth my while getting one. I think my sister has claimed hers. My Irish roots don't go back to 1815. I think on my father's side, my grandfather was born in Cork in the southwest of Ireland in 1903. I think his parents came there from Eastern Europe in the late 1890s. So that's where that goes back to. And my mother's side, I think more recently, my mother's parents were both born in the UK and moved to Ireland. So it's all, everyone always moving around. There's generations of people immigrating and emigrating.
That's fascinating. And when I put up my Irish Readathon TBR, you made a comment on one of the books. Let me grab that. I'd love to hear you talk about that a bit more. You knew something about this author, didn't you? On the Side of the Angels by Betty Miller.
So I researched her because you were talking about it.
Yes.
I wasn't familiar with Betty Miller, and you said she was an Irish writer. So I immediately started looking her up. And she too, so it turns out that Betty Miller was also from Cork. So she's, roughly, within 10 years of when my grandfather was born in Cork, and my grandfather was born there. So his parents had immigrated to Cork, and then they moved to Dublin in sort of the 1910s, around about then. And I think she was in Cork, born in Cork, 1911, something like that. But discovering who Betty Miller was, I then realized that I knew her son. I knew of her son. I didn't know him personally. Her son was Jonathan Miller, who was a very famous intellectual and, originally comedian. He was part of the original Beyond the Fringe team. So he was in Oxford with Dudley Moore. Some of these names are going to mean nothing to people. Dudley Moore and Peter Cook and Alan Bennett, who may be more familiar to bookish people, but they were comedy heroes. They're the precursors to Monty Python, to that whole rebirth of British comedy in the early and late 60s. And Jonathan Miller was part of that. He went on to become a theatre director. Well, he was a doctor, first of all. He was a medical doctor, and he became a theatre and opera director, and it's one of those great public intellectuals. You had the video recently about Robertson Davis in black and white, talking. Jonathan Miller was kind of like that. He would show up on those kind of shows, a little, I would say, less self-involved, a little wittier than Robertson Davis. But yeah, that's in the 70s. That's how I remember him, and that was Betty Miller's son. So I thought that was interesting. I had no idea that he had Irish roots.
And you told me a lot of that in your comment on my video, and I see now that actually on the bio page there's a little blurb about him too. And among all the other things that you mentioned, Jonathan Miller was also a sculptor. Yeah,
he was one of those, I don't know if we'll see the like again, that generation of people who kind of did everything really, really well.
Maybe that trait dies with you and I, Daniel.
Oh, yeah.
This is just completely off the cuff, but I'm looking at the book and it doesn't appear like there's anything about kind of Jewish, about the story. But yeah, Betty Miller, born 1910 in County Cork to Jewish, Lithuanian, and Swedish parents. And she married a psychiatrist. And I remember her saying, oh my God, she sounds so interesting. But if you can get a copy of this, would you like to buddy read it at some point?
I'm going to look for it and send it to my mum's. And if I can pick it up in a couple of weeks, that sounds great.
But I'm thinking like at the earliest and sometime in the second half of this year, maybe even later than that. So there's no urgency, but I will save it to buddy with you if you're interested in it. I don't think there's anything about her background in this novel. It's set during World War I, but I'd love to buddy read it with you.
Cool, very good. Look forward to it.
So let's look at Goodreads. So we were talking before we turned the record button on, and we're quite compatible, aren't we?
Well, one of the things I do when I add friends in Goodreads, and before I knew about BookTube, I was adding friends like crazy, indiscriminately, in a way that I don't do on other social networks. I just thought, the more bookish people I could find who were interested, and it turns out it's not a great social network, Goodreads. So I make friends. But one of the things I always do is compare books. And when I look at your and my reading history together, I think there's something like 340 books we had in common, which, in my experience of doing this with other people on Goodreads, is way at the top end of overlap. So that's just fascinating to me, that we're two people from different sides of the world who've ended up in even more different sides of the world, and yet we are joined by this massive overlap of reading.
Isn't that fabulous? And I see that also we deeply disagree on a few. So I'd like to get into all of that. So the first one that showed up on my side is you loved a book that I have had on my TBR for years. In fact, I had a copy of it. And in Vancouver, I had a huge library and I liquidated it to move to Japan. So I don't have this book anymore. I never did read it. Do you want me to tell you the title? Timoleon Vieta, Come Home, A Sentimental Journey by Dan Rhodes. And you gave it 5 stars. So please, what's your elevator pitch for that one?
So it's a very odd book. Timoleon Vieta, if I remember, it's been a while now since I read it, is a dog. And
I think so.
Yeah, and so dog stories, some people sort of switch off the minute it's a dog story, but it's a weirdo thing. Dan Rhodes has written a few books, and he wrote at least one of his books he wrote under a pseudonym, I think, of Danuta Rhodes, where he adopted a a female personality, and I don't know if he was transitioning or if he was trying to write from a female perspective. I haven't read any of his other books. This was a book that I was part of some online book club, and it came up and I ordered it, and it was just a weird, fun, kind of moving, terrific book. I remember it very fondly, but he's published more since then, but I don't think he's been at the zeitgeist again. Yeah, it was a good read.
That's awesome, because I can't even remember how I found out about it, but I did, and I got a copy and it sat there unread, and I don't have it anymore. So I will track it down again. Claire-Louise Bennett, Pond. We agreed deeply on that one.
Yeah, it was terrific. I got it right.
Awesome.
In the UK, it's published it by Fitzcarraldo. I don't know what edition you have, but Fitzcarraldo is this UK press that does these austere monochromatic books. So I love these Fitzcarraldo, all the Fitzcarraldo fiction. And I think they publish maybe 4 books a year. So it's something they have a very fixed schedule. If it's fiction, it's blue cover and it's embossed with their logo. And if it's nonfiction, it's white with blue writing on it. And they're just very simple, no messing around. I love French flaps. So I think it's an objet d'art in itself, just the book. Now, the writing here was weirdo, fun, short stories, but this aggregated impact of being slightly off kilter, but finding some truth just shy of due north that I really found powerful. And I believe she has a novel coming out soon that I'm very excited about.
I think I knew that, and I loved it. I have the other edition, because here is our first fight of the evening, Daniel. I will not allow Fitzcarraldo books in my house because they're so bland and ugly.
Oh. You know what? Listen, it's not an argument that's going to get us very far, because I understand what you're saying. There are some things where we'll disagree and I will slam down the laptop screen and we will never talk again. This isn't one of those. I understand what you're saying. I happen to like the cleanness of it, the austerity. You know, you can see from the rest of my shelves, they're not all like that.
That's right.
So I've got a few Fitzcarraldo editions. I don't style them all together, so it's all one color in a line, because that would be dull. But yeah, I kind of like it every now and then. I've got a few of them, and I like the fact that it's giving me nothing and I have to do all the work myself.
There you go.
Not all the time. Okay.
Fair enough. And I have the same opinion about Persephone books. There's dull.
I don't have any of those. Yeah, those covers are less sort of compelling, I think.
Well, I think I've just earned myself at least, I'm going to predict 7 downvotes for those comments. And we both are fans of Knausgård. You've read, I think, the whole series.
Yeah, they were astonishing. I mean, I feel like the way people now talk about In Search of Lost Time, which I've never managed to get through the whole of Proust. I've got 3 volumes of 6 something here, and they were a struggle for me, the first 3 volumes. I think people will be talking about this work by Knausgård in years to come, because it is so unlike anything. It is incredibly intimate and yet perversely specific. To me, it was just utterly compelling. And I read each one, including the last 1,200 page volume 6, which is beyond bonkers. But yeah, I think there's something I think he's delivered something very special.
I loved the first one and really liked the second one, and I haven't gotten any further, but I'm taking my sweet time. You're probably aware, are you aware that he is a writer non grata, persona non grata with Steve Donahue?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Or you can probably guess.
There's a couple of people that I've liked that Steve is very down on. To me, Steve Donahue is one of the reasons why I decided I would start making videos, and the style of my videos, which is just talking and then posting. I don't do in almost any editing at all, partly because I'm an incompetent fool and partly because I just wanted this to be a sort of no filter splurge. So I have a lot of time for him and his opinions, and I take it very seriously. If he has a problem with Knausgård, he may have very good reason.
He is not a fan of autofiction in general. I have a screenshot, if I can find it, I'll put it in one of his Instagram posts where he had a copy of Knausgård, the title of the book, of course, My Struggle, and then he put a post-it note on. So My Struggle with Brevity. I love
and it's
that.
Fair. It's fair comment. Again, it's not something that I would ever sort of fall out with him over, because I get it. I wish I could explain the appeal the books had to me. I would be a smarter and more and better broadcaster if I could. But it was something very primal.
Yeah, I loved it. I love what I've read so far.
The other thing is Knausgård is exactly my age.
Mm-hmm.
So when he's telling his story of his history, when he's 13 years old, it's the same year I was 13. When he's 22, when he's going, so I don't know if how much that played into it, but that had an impact on me.
Well, so he's much too old for Steve, is what we're saying here, really.
Exactly. Those millennials, they just don't get it.
One of the very first books I ever read by a Jewish writer was in high school, grade 9 English, Chaim Potok, The Chosen.
Oh, it's wonderful. Chosen's a wonderful book. And there's a sequel to it also called The Promise, which is also wonderful. I might even prefer the Promise. But yeah, The Chosen, I read The Chosen. Yeah, so yes, Chaim Potok is a Jewish author, an American Jewish author. I read it, I think, like you would have read it. It wasn't my world he was talking about. I grew up Jewish in London, and we were sort of traditional and considered ourselves Jews and knew other Jews and went to synagogue and stuff. But the world that Chaim Potok is talking about in that book is totally alien to me. So I would have read it with much of the same view of it that you did. And it's a book about friendship, and it's a book about identity, as much of Potok's work is. He has another book, which was perhaps even more influential to me. He has a book called My Name is Asher Lev, which is again also about a Jewish boy, but growing up in a more Orthodox community. And it's a boy who is discovering himself through art. And while his family want him to study and learn Talmud and be part of the community and follow in, I think his father's footsteps, my father might have been a rabbi, his way of expressing himself is through art. And in studying art, much of the history of art is about visions of Christ and a religious iconography. And in learning about art, he has to understand how that's part of the history. And it's about his growth and the clash between art and religion. And that, I think, had an even bigger influence on me than The Chosen, which is a great tale. But that idea, these two need to coexist, my relationship to religion, and yet this ability to depict anything at any time, because art should have no boundaries. So whether you have boundaries in your life, when it comes to art, you can't have boundaries, or art, because art doesn't have any. And that was, I think, I talk a bit about Chaim Potok. That was very influential. I read those books when I was like 13, 14 and had a big impact on me.
We were a very similar age. And I remember a lot of those themes about art being in The Chosen as well. What did the boy want to be? He didn't want to be a rabbi like his dad, or he wanted to be what?
So there's two boys, right? There's one who is more traditional, and there's one who's from a sort of more ultra-Orthodox family. So I don't know if the ultra-Orthodox is the right, but there's one who's comes from a more religious background than the other. And that one, I think he's called Danny. He ends up, I think we see him later on in The Promise, he's a psychiatrist. So he's moved from a purely religious world where his study was all about religion and the legal aspects. That's very much what the Talmud is about, the legalization of Jewish law. And he takes that sort of investigation and that critical mind and moves into a secular world and becomes a psychiatrist where he helps other people. I hope I'm not misrepresenting the story.
And I'm remembering, I think by the end of The Chosen, and so this might be a spoiler if anybody cares, because I remember at the end of The Chosen, he comes out of the closet to his father, the rabbi, to say, I want to be a psychiatrist.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I had a wonderful high school English teacher, Mr. Roberts. He was, this was in small town Saskatchewan. He was Welsh, anti-monarchist, probably atheist. And he put on our curricula, we had The Chosen, we had the most famous novel about African-American injustice trial.
To Kill a Mockingbird?
To Kill a Mockingbird, and a South African apartheid novel. He just put me on the path to reading my way into social justice. Yeah, really formative. And I always remember that my essay on The Chosen, he said, if you'd made this one last little connection, I would have been forced to give you 100%, but you get 96 or something. So yeah, thank you, Mr. Roberts. There was a couple authors on here that are a little bit controversial. One is Colum McCann, Apeirogon, how do you pronounce that one?
Apeirogon.
You loved it.
Apeirogon was his last year, was longlisted for the Booker. So I think there were two levels of controversy here. And as is the case with these things, they compounded each other. I might have already acquired the novel when people started talking about it. I'll deal with the two of them. That's why, if anyone has not watched KD Books, Kieran, he read Apeirogon because he was reading he called himself the Booker Boy. It's a great channel, if anyone doesn't know him. He read Apeirogon as part of his reading the entire book along list. And before he did his review, he did a 40-minute video about the controversy and his response to it, and being fully empathetic to anybody who had issues, and addressing some of the issues and acknowledging other issues. So the one to acknowledge is the fact that there have been reports that Colum McCann has behaved improperly towards women. There was a flare-up, and then there was an echo of it, and it hasn't really gone beyond that. Now, I don't want to say that means anything, because there are some of these stories go and they run and they run and they run, and more people come up. And this one came out, and I'm not taking anything away or diminishing those reports when they happened. They happened, and there hasn't been a response from the publisher. He doesn't seem to have lost his career or his thing, but that's out there, and I take that seriously. And anyone who responds to that and says, I don't want to read him because of that, I'm not judging whether I believe the story, I don't believe the story, but it's out there. I'm fully sympathetic with that, and that's great. The other controversy, which I feel more able to address, is the question of representation. So Apeirogon is a book about two men living in the same region that I live in. One is an Israeli man and one is a Palestinian man. They both, 10 years apart, lost daughters to acts of violence. Let's put it that way, to try and to keep the comparison alive. And these two people are real men. You can go and see them being interviewed, and they talk about their story, and they're friends, and they formed a group together of other parents of children lost to violence in this region. Their story and their friendship I find tremendously inspiring and hope-giving, and a story worth knowing and worth learning about. Now, Colum McCann has written a novel. So first of all, he wrote an essay, and it was in a collection of essays of writers who were brought to Israel, visited the occupied territories, engaged with Israelis and Palestinians together and separately, and wrote essays about that experience. And the essay, he wrote a non-fiction essay about meeting these men and the group that they formed. And then he went on over 2 or 3 years to write a novel with their, not just approval, with their help and with their involvement. And I think it's an astonishing book. I think it works as a work of fiction, or maybe it's not even a work of fiction. Maybe it's not a novel. Maybe it's just a book, and we shouldn't, calling it one thing or the other is irrelevant, because it's something that I think is worth anyone's time and worth engaging with. The idea that he was appropriating their story, I think, is a bit silly, or at least undermined by the fact that they have both said, we think this is a great representation of our story, and we're glad that an author with a following and a publishing deal is able to reach more people with this story than we've been able to in all the years that we've been telling it. And that's a sort of very mercenary look at it, but they were on board with it. And I think other people expressing frustration with the idea of appropriation, when the people whose lives they're claiming were being appropriated are saying, no, we don't think that's what's happening. That's more or less the whole thing.
That's fascinating. And certainly the claim of sexual assault against him, that's an open thing, and you have talked about it very sensitively. And it's your opinion on the whole cultural appropriation thing that I found fascinating. Yeah. So I want to move next to John Boyne's novel. I think it's a YA novel, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
Yeah, there's been some talk about, I haven't read any other John Boyne, and there were a couple, there's The Hearts of Visible Furies that a lot of people really liked, and I didn't read it. And then there's another one as well that I didn't read. And part of the reason why I didn't go and read those books when they came out was because I had him in my head pegged as this sort of YA author. I read The Boy in Striped Pajamas. It's perfectly fine. I have a problem with books that talk about how tough it was to be a Nazi, because, it's just not a story that I particularly am interested in hearing. Of all the stories that we could tell, all the historical viewpoints whose shoes we can step into, the one that says, oh, wasn't it difficult being involved? I don't need to hear stories about white people who had slaves and how conflicted they found that, or Nazis. And in this instance, the the boy in the striped pajamas is a Jewish boy who makes friends with a son of the, I think, commandant of Auschwitz. And Auschwitz is never named Auschwitz. He has this sort of cutesy, the way he hears it as out with or something. It's all a bit cutesy, and the ending is supposed to be shocking, but it's all told from the viewpoint of the Germans. And,
Okay, but you didn't have
overly cute.
You didn't have problems of representation or that he mishandled anything, because I have friends, and I won't name them, that are on BookTube that just see red whenever that book is mentioned because they think it's inaccurate, historically inaccurate, and I've forgotten the nuances of their critique, but they just think it's trash.
To me, it's a lot of YA is sort of playing in broader strokes. It's like drawing with crayons rather than fine pencil work. And so, that doesn't mean to diminish. You can make beautiful art with crayons. And I know you don't read YA, right? But I occasionally dip in and read. I read a very, very good book aimed at, I think, 12-year-olds this week, which I really enjoyed. But we're dealing with it's a different medium. And so all those criticisms that your friends are making may be entirely accurate. I sort of took it as face value. It's a little cutesy. I don't think it's as shocking as it thought it was. And it kind of put me off reading other books by him.
Okay, so I loved his The Heart's Invisible Furies. It was my top read of 20, whatever year it came out.
Wow.
I absolutely loved it. And then everything else I've read by him that he wrote before and after that, I have hated. So I have tear-stained cheeks as I closed the book, The Heart's Invisible Furies, and turned the camera on and did this tear-stained review of how much I loved it. And it's a very special novel. But I have since then read an earlier novel of his, The Absolutist, and I have an extremely ranty review about that, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. And then I read the one of his that, what did it win? It won the BookTube Prize, the inaugural year of the BookTube Prize. It won, and I didn't get a chance to read it until later that year, and I absolutely hated it. So yeah, John Boyne he's kind of a mixed bag.
I know which videos I'm going to be watching this afternoon. That sounds super fun.
Yeah, they're both very ranty. What was the YA novel that you read? YA gets so little attention on my channel. You might as well shock my subscribers. Tell us about that.
Yeah. This was a book called In the Key of Code by Aimee, Aimee, Lucido, Lucido. It's a terrific, it was quite a thick book, but actually the chapters are very short and sort of written in poetry and a bit of code. I'm not a coder, but it gives you some of the basics of writing Java. But the main character is also someone who's grown up around a lot of music. So it's about that interplay between music and coding and finding your voice and finding a way to express stuff. I found it quite lovely. It was just terrific. And often books set in school, there are goodies and baddies, mean kids who've got mean parents, and that's why they do the mean things. And this had enough room in this small book aimed at 12-year-olds that everyone was given space to breathe. So someone who might have been mean actually had a reason and had an arc where you got to see that, okay, there's room for growth. I got a kick out of it. And something like that takes me 2 or 3 hours to get through on a Saturday morning. I sit in bed and I get through it and I move on to something else. And I've enjoyed it. Goes on the shelf. It's fun.
I'm on a bit of a book buying ban at the moment, but in order to emotionally prepare myself for this fairly strict book buying ban, I did a lot of pre-ordering at the end of last year. And one of the ones that I pre-ordered is an Israeli novel, and it's being published, I think, at least in the West, or at least in North America, in April. I wonder if you know about it. It's called Aquarium, and you'll have to help me with the pronunciation of the author, Yehoshua.
I think I've done some research on this as well.
It's about deaf characters, 2 deaf sisters. Their parents are dead, and they were in almost cult-like seclusion. And then their parents died, and they had to come out and face the real world.
Got it, and I found it. So the first name will pronounce Ya'ara, and Shahori that's Ya'ara Shahori. I don't know it. I don't know if you find this as an expat living abroad. I've been in Israel 25 years, but I'm not a native. I can have conversations in Hebrew. My children who were born here, my oldest came as a baby. So they all are fully bilingual and get an enormous laugh out of hearing me try and communicate or pay a bill in Hebrew. But my relationship with local literature is embarrassingly weak. And only recently I've sort of trying to push myself that I should read more Israeli authors, and I read them in English. If I was to read a book in Hebrew, first of all, there's no vowels, so it's much harder for me to read it, and the vowels really tell you where the tense and the gender of the word. So it would be impossible for me to sort of, not impossible, but it would take me a much longer read and would be less enjoyable. So I have to wait for them to be published in English, just like everyone else. So I'm starting to read more Israeli authors. This is on my radar. I've seen that book cover before because someone else was talking about it. But I don't know what you're like, whether you read Japanese authors, whether you read in Japanese at all,
No.
or whether you or wait for them in English and read them just like the rest of us.
Yeah, I cannot read almost no Japanese, so better get the translator's name in here. It's translated from the Hebrew by Todd Hasek-Lowy. And yes, the two sisters, I think they're maybe adult because I think their parents die maybe of old age, and they had kind of kept them in seclusion in this totally deaf environment with I don't know the details, but then their parents die and then they have to, their life changes, and it's about that journey. It's about that experience. Sounds very interesting.
Published in the UK. Is it out yet?
April 13th, yeah. I believe it drops.
Yeah, April 13th, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Very good. All right, I'll look out for that.
I noticed that you have read several books by a Jewish writer. I presume it's an Israeli writer, but I want you to set me straight and sell him to me. I'm not remembering his name, so Yehoshua. I'm mangling the name.
A.B. Yehoshua.
That's him. Is it a him? Right. Is it a man?
Yes, he's a him. And his first name, I think, is probably Avraham, which is Abraham, I think, but he goes by A.B. Well, in Hebrew, he's Aleph Bet Yehoshua. Yeah, and he's one of Israel. So this was in my early days when I first came to Israel, and he was a classic Israeli. He's still alive, I believe. He's a classic Israeli author. I think I read 3 of his books. I found them all very dense, and maybe it was the translation, but maybe not. I read those 3 books probably 20 years ago and struggled with each of them, as I did with a few of those. So that the classic Israeli authors of that time, sort of 70s, early 80s, when I moved here in the 90s. But so he was well established as one of the grand men of Israeli letters. Aleph Bet Yehoshua, who's still with us. Amos Oz is another famous author, been translated and published all over the world, who died a few years ago. And I read a couple of his books, and the early ones, again, found them very dense and struggled with, and then later on clicked with him a lot more. And then I guess David Grossman is the other one who's translated. He won the International Booker Award, I think, a couple of years ago, but he's also widely translated and read, and he is still with us. And I've been to readings and interviews with him a couple of times. Aleph Bet Yehoshua, A.B. Yehoshua was tough for me. So I read Mr. Manny and A Late Divorce, I think, and then some short stories, The Continuing Silence of a Poet. Look at my memory. I can't always do this. I've plucked those 3 titles out of the air. That's genius. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. You caught me on somebody I read 20 years ago and grilling me about him. So yeah, I don't have much to say, except I didn't love all of them and I haven't gone back and read him since. Well,
this is the first of many chats, I hope. I would like to talk to you about a lot of Canada's best writers are Jewish Canadian writers. So that's a topic for maybe for next time. Daniel, it's been an absolute delight having you here. I hope that you'll come back real soon.
Shawn, it's such a treat to talk to anyone about books. And as you are, all joking aside, you are one of the people that not just me, I know many people look up to as a real champion for this community. So thank you for having me on.
Well, my pleasure. And your check is definitely in the mail. And the rest of you, thank you for watching.